Well, Paul, here we are. We should say to the audience, a journalist's least favourite thing, having the tables turned and having to answer questions. So here you go, here's my moment. I thought I'd begin actually in Romania, partly because it was I don't think I've ever told you this before, but you were one of the reasons I went into journalism. And certainly I joined ITN because as a student I was like bunking off lectures to come home and watch you cover the Romanian Revolution. I'd like to begin there, partly because that and partly because it was kind of that period where the modern world was being shaped, I guess you could argue. What are your memories of it?
The most remarkable Christmas of my life. And you're absolutely right, because the world as we knew it was toppling.
The battle outside raged for more than 3 hours. It ended suddenly with the arrival of more tanks opposed to the old communist regime.
I had started this summer in Afghanistan watching the Russians become the then superpower to get a bloody nose there. We'd come back, the Berlin Wall had gone down. I went to Prague and saw the revolution there.
More than 40 years of communist domination is ending here, now, in this room.
Got a call just before Christmas to go to Romania for what we thought was going to be the same again. We got in a little plane, had difficulty getting a film crew to go. It was just before Christmas, everybody had been very busy. I had a freelance film crew, and everything looked like it was going to be just the same as Czechoslovakia, Velvet Revolution, until we were circling over Bucharest airport when they said we can't land. There's a gun battle going on across the runways, and our pilot, great presence of mind, said, I'm afraid I haven't got the fuel to go anywhere else. You're going to have to let me land.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let me land. So we were the last people to touch down there. And there was a gun battle being fought for control of the airport, and it was several hours before we could leave the city. We were transported into the outskirts of Bucharest by some very kind people who suggested that we, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, find a hotel, somewhere to get our heads down. It's very dangerous out there, they said, and when it's light it'll be safer. And we had a debate amongst the crew as to what we should do, and thankfully they went along with my suggestion, which was, let's find out where we can feed material from, if it still works, and that was the television station.
This battle has now been going on for almost 24 hours, but despite all their firepower, the troops are not able to winkle out those men still loyal to Ceausescu.
What's in your head at this point in your career, though? Because you've spent quite a long time getting to ITN. You are now established as one of ITN's leading foreign reporters, but it's amazing. I guess it was fascinating to be there, but it's dangerous. I mean, are you just focused on the job? Are you thinking, what am I doing here? It's Christmas. What's going through your head at this point in your career?
All those things. Yeah. And also the fact that although, yes, within that year and probably the year before, you'd clocked up quite a number of big stories, you still felt quite new at this thing. And people are looking to you for quite a big judgment. You know, do we take cover? Do we go in the direction of the bangs, which is always a very difficult one to call. I had a wonderful sound recordist working with me at the time called Paul Davies, who swung it because I suggested, let's go to the television station and see if we can feed whatever we managed to film out. And he said he's done this sort of thing before. Little did he know I'd only done it a few times. And so we went to the TV station. And that's really, my career took off from that moment, because we turned up at the TV station. There were crowds of young people outside, students it turned out, and they were pouring petrol into bottles, making Molotov cocktails, and being students, they spoke English, which is wonderful. And I asked, what are you doing?
If it is necessary, we fight with these bombs.
With the petrol bombs?
Yes, yes.
And they said that we're going to protect the TV station. The TV station is now the heart of the revolution, and Ceausescu's Securitate are coming to silence the TV station, and we mustn't let that happen. And they were forming protective ranks around the TV station. So we kind of knew we were in the right place.
It's now after 5 o'clock in the morning. The shooting has finally finished, and the revolutionaries are still in charge of the television station.
This was a kind of moment you'd grown up in the Cold War like I did. You know, we never, it's hard to explain that. No one ever thought the Berlin Wall, I certainly didn't, was ever going to come down, the Iron Curtain was going to come down. When you look back, how do you view this period, you know, going through, there's your coverage of, you know, the Czech Revolution and so on. Did you feel incredibly hopeful that the world was changing, you know, in an exciting era full of possibilities?
I think so. I do think so. And events like the events in Prague had encouraged that. You know, people dancing in Wenceslas Square. That was our previous assignment. That's what we thought we were going into in Romania. Instead, it was bullets and the worst side of that old sort of tyranny that you're referring to. I mean, the secret police were a big thing. The Securitate, secret tunnels, people informing on others. The TV station where we spent that incredible week under siege. The people there had lived with censorship, with a member of the party sitting on, before you get to read the news tonight, you would have to hand over to this person, and he'd have to say, oh no, you're not leading with that, and you're certainly not having that in the bulletin at all. And they'd lived with that for years.
I'm sure that there are those who'd like to have the news here
sure
like that, but that's
that was kind of the atmosphere, the thought that could be put behind them a better life. And that's what encouraged, and this was, I think, one of the most amazing things of that revolution and my experience of it was that I was inside a building that became the most important building in Bucharest.
Inside the besieged television studios, tension as rumours circulated that the deposed president's agents had already infiltrated the building. All eyes and guns were trained on the lift shafts.
The television workers say the secret police have tunnels leading here inside the television station. The reason their guns are pointed at the elevators is that they can't be sure just who will come through those doors next.
The revolutionaries set up their various councils and everything there in the room. Two rooms along from where I was sleeping. They were dragging in ministers and members of the Ceausescu family to be interrogated right past the door where I was. I mean, this was an amazing heart of a revolution, and yet the people who were making this place work were people that you and I would recognise. They were producers, they were runners, they were cameramen, they were technicians, they were engineers. They were the people who get a TV station going, and all of them had taken a decision based on that thing you're talking about, thinking that there might be a better life. They'd all taken a decision that they wouldn't go home, they wouldn't stay with their families, they wouldn't do the safe thing and wait and see which way the wind blows. They would take the risk, and there were terrible risks if it went wrong, and they'd go into work, often running across streets under gunfire, and some of them lost their lives doing it, and put out this new version of what's happening in Romania. Amazing.
I'd love to talk about risk in a minute, but before I get to that, I kind of think you've been here 40 years, give or take. It's a good time, Paul. It's a good time. You know, in a way, the first part of your career is quite dominated by that incredible moment when the world was freeing up. You know, there's a bit of the aftermath, which was much more troublesome, which we'll come to in a minute. But there was this sense of kind of hope. The last sort of, you know, period of your time here, it seems to me, has just been, the world's been darkening a bit. You know, there's China, there's the rise of threats, you know, terrorism, you know, from 9/11 onwards, really. How do you, I mean, do you sort of come to this point very hopeful still about the possibilities for humanity, or do you worry a little bit about kind of freedom and democracy?
A bit of both. Certainly there's plenty to be worried about. You look out there, and what used to be the Soviet Union's been replaced by all sorts of other threats, some of them regional, some of them massive new superpowers like China. You look upon our own recent experiences, Afghanistan didn't end well. You could argue Iraq didn't end particularly well. But I don't think you lose hope. I find doing this job that and have found for years and years and years that almost anywhere you go in the world, you'll find good if you look for it. And you'll find some of the best stories we tell are of people doing exceptional things, sometimes in the direst of circumstances. And plenty of reasons not to get incredibly downhearted. You're in the centre of COVID. It's its first year. It's having such an appalling impact on the country. And I get sent out to meet this old chap who apparently is walking up and down his own garden to raise a bit of money for the NHS. It might make a good story, they said. Eccentric old fellow, used to be a soldier. Captain Tom, I would love to shake your hand. I can't, but I'll salute you instead. And we know what that turned into. There's hope out there. There are wonderful stories and wonderful people out there.
I wanted to ask you, there's no escaping the fact that there have also been great moments of darkness. Now, you think of Bob Stewart in Bosnia and the story you did on the massacre of Muslims in the cellar. And I mean, it's just the most horrific story, the most horrific story.
The Muslim population has been driven out by Croatian soldiers who destroyed the mosque and set fire to every Muslim home. Down in a cellar, what first appeared to be a pile of charred wood and rags, but these are human remains.
Do you find it hard to get the darkness out of your soul a bit when you've witnessed something like that, and does it stay with you for a long time?
Yes, it does, but it works in a strange sort of way, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. At the time, I mean, yes, I remember walking into that cellar and realising that the men had been marched off somewhere else and killed, and it was practically all the women and children of that particular village of Arnici, herded into a cellar, and then it's set on fire.
Perhaps the most horrifying thing about this latest slaughter is that this is typical of the atrocities that have been committed over the last few days. Whole families herded into cellars, either shot or burnt to death with no possible hope of escape.
And when you walked in there for the first time and you realised that what you were walking into and what you were walking on was the remains of what had been families, that is just about as bad as it gets. But as you will have discovered, you kind of have to get over that to do the job that you're doing. You know, you have to talk to people, you have to film things, you then have to get the piece together in some sort of coherent form so the outside world knows what has happened here. And then you find a way of getting the piece back and on television around the world, as that was. And that helps massively. It's afterwards. It's after you've come back. It's when you've got quiet moments that you start to wonder about, you know, just what man is capable of, yes.
It's also impossible to look at your career without dealing with the fact that you have taken very considerable risks at points in it. You know, I wanted to just talk about Dubrovnik first of all, because it's probably one of the most remarkable 12 minutes of film in ITN's history. And, you know, in 100 years' time, when people are writing the history of ITN, your report from Dubrovnik will be front and centre of kind of as an example of what we do.
The destruction continued hour after hour.
When the Serbian-led federal forces first laid siege to Dubrovnik 6 weeks ago, they warned the Croatian garrison surrender or face the consequences. Few people in the world could have realised that this was what they meant by consequences.
There you are in a besieged city, surely at times wondering what on earth you were doing there still. Because it's frightening day after day, right?
Yeah, when the hotel that you're staying at is actually on the front line to the extent that it's being hit all the time, and you're working with a wonderful editor who's seen everything in his lifetime, from Fred Hickey, putting together the day's action as filmed by my cameraman Nigel Thompson, and for the first time ever you see him actually lose it, and he's losing it because he can't tell if the explosions he's hearing are the ones on the tape that he's editing or the ones of shells hitting the building that he's sitting in. So that's how on the front line that was. But to tell those sort of stories, that's where you've got to be. And I don't regret that for a moment. I think that's a form of journalism that the world needs and is slowly disappearing, which is a shame.
I was going to ask you, there is no escaping that risk has been a big part of your career. Would you do it all again?
Yes, I would. Would I be as naive again? I was naive.
These people were civilians trying to flee the fighting. The blast from another shell blew 2 of us off the road.
I honestly used to think that because I had a press card and I was neutral, I knew I was neutral, I would happily go and report from one side one day and then turn up on the other front line the next day and say, you know, let me tell it from your side. And for years and years and years, that's how we all operated, protected by this sort of transparent neutrality. And as we all know, it ended. We weren't protected at all. In fact, there came a time when we were targeted. And now, because it's deemed that just doing the job that you and I have been talking about and that you've done as well, the risk is considered by our lords and masters to be too great. The risk of things like, and I'm not criticising them too much, but the risk of ending up in an orange jumpsuit, in front of a video, being paraded as some sort of horrible propaganda tool before possibly meeting a grisly end. Those risks are very real, and we've seen them, and we've lost colleagues. So I understand the reasons why my industry has changed. I don't agree with the changes necessarily.
When I think of some of your work in the last 5 to 10 years, if I went and asked anyone in the newsroom, or probably I would hope any of our viewers, I think they would, they would note a particularly high degree of empathy in your reporting. Do you, whether it's PTSD or very big stories you've covered, do you think you've changed as a reporter over time?
Yes, I think I've changed as a person over time. I think we all do. And we change because of the experiences that we have, the people that we see, and the events we see, and the things that we see people going through. So yes, you do. You're bound to. I mean, you mentioned the Lee Rigby report. I think that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do for a whole host of different reasons, some of them technical, but most of them just from the morality of it. I mean, this was raw, it had just happened, and this poor man had been hacked to death on an East London street, and here we had the 2 people who did it with his blood on their hands, explaining why they'd done it. Now, that is important. That is very important. It's an attempt to justify it, and it's it's totally unsatisfactory. But it's so important that we understand why, and those are the sort of things that are going through your mind. But at the same time, you're thinking about every single word and every single image that you use, and the impact that it's going to have. And you think that Lee Rigby's family may be watching this, and you're thinking of that as you're writing the words and choosing the pictures, and that's quite a burden. But if you don't have that burden, if you don't think about those things, then I don't think you're doing the job properly, because life's bigger than who gets a scoop on the news that night. I mean, there's people out there, and the impact on them is life-changing.
Paul, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to work with you. You've done an amazing job bringing the world into the living rooms of, many people watching this. Me when I'm home, me when I'm in the studio, me before I joined the company. So thank you very much for all that, and I'm sure we will continue to see you, I hope, in the future.
Thank you.